my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker, Marisa Murray. On a personal note, I had the privilege of meeting Marisa during the launch of Women in Tech Canada in Montreal last month, and her insight and passion for leadership deeply resonated with me. Marisa is the founding president and chief executive coach at Leaderley International. She's a former partner with Accenture and VP at Bell, and she leveraged her extensive executive experience to enhance the value of her coaching and leadership programs. Marisa is also a TEDx speaker and a 3-time Amazon best-selling author and a highly sought-after speaker. Thank you, Marisa, to be with us today.
Yes, I'm super excited. Thank you everyone for joining, and for those who watch the recording, which will be great as well. I love this topic. This is kind of a topic we co-created with the team, thinking about this shift sometimes that we all go through, where we begin the beginning of our careers really leaning a lot on our expertise. And as we become more and more senior, we have to lean on others a lot for expertise, which means because the things that we're doing are more complicated and the things that we're doing require more diverse of expertise. And that really challenges often our influencing skills. So we're going to explore influence as a skill set today. I'm going to kind of run through some materials, stop for some questions. I believe we're going to have the chat running for comments, and then the Q&A for questions. So please feel free to write your questions and also engage a little bit in the chat. So hopefully we can make this a little bit dynamic. The QR code on the screen is so that you can download a copy of all the slides. I'll show that again at the end, and we'll also put the link to the slides in the chat a little bit later on. So don't worry about feverishly writing anything down. Whatever inspires you, you'll have a chance to look at again when you get the slides. So without further ado, I'm just going to take you through a little bit what I have planned for us today. So basically, when I was reflecting on this topic, I thought it'd be really helpful if we just ground ourselves in why influence matters. I want to talk about leadership mindset because that's a huge topic and passion of mine. All leadership, my company's called Leaderley because I think our journey to our best life is our journey to our best leadership. And leadership is this thing that kind of we bring from ourselves and put into the world. And our mindset, a healthy mindset around leadership, is something that I think every leader works on. And then I want to talk a little bit about this idea of focusing on who versus how, distinguish between influence and persuasion, and then talk about how you build some co-creative relationships. So what I hope you'll get out of today is some good reflection, and then also some tools that you can play with to increase your influence. So that's what we have planned for today. I love that there's people from all these international places, so welcome everyone. So let's just start with why influence matters. So influence matters for all kinds of reasons, as you probably intuit, but these are just a few of my favorites. So, one reason why it matters is you have an idea, but you don't necessarily have the support to make it happen. Or you need to inspire people so that they believe in the organization's vision, right? How about when you need to get people on board with major change initiatives? Or attract and retain really top talent. So that's influence as well. Or the team is going awry and you need them to do something different. So you need to influence them to get in alignment with what you need. And sometimes it's that your teams are working so hard and have been working so hard, but they still need to go through this next pitch. So how do we influence them to stay engaged? Or maybe we know we have a really critical conversation that has to go well, and we know that the only way it's going to go well is if we're able to influence the other person. And sometimes other people tell us we need more influence. We need to have more presence. We need to have more executive presence or leadership presence, or we need to have more followership, or we have to have other people's measure of our influence on others. And sometimes we have to advocate for jobs for ourselves and influence people that we're ready for the next level of our position. And finally, sometimes it's because we want to actually set boundaries for ourselves to make sure we have time for all the other beautiful aspects of our lives. And so we want to influence to be able to create the life that we want outside of work. So these are kind of some of my top 10 reasons. Basically, leadership is influence is one way of thinking about this as well. You could see how broad it can impact. So I'm wondering if you have a chance to write in the chat, where do you think you might need more influence? Which ones of those resonate, or also do you have other ones? So where would you say you need more influence? I'm going to give you guys a minute because I really want to hear. Family, for sure. Influencing your family, Elena, or having time for family? It could be either. I always struggle a bit with influencing my teenage sons, so that's what came to mind when I read that. Family, customers, team, yes, yeah, both, yeah, absolutely. Okay, fantastic. So, change, yeah, absolutely. A lot of us are, we notice things, we come into new roles, we notice things, we want to really change, or we're in charge of a change mandate. So yeah, great examples. And being the right person for the role. Okay, great. I'm glad some of these resonated with you. So I want to let you guys know that, I'll just let those keep coming in, that about 99% of what I'm going to talk about today is good advice for every leader and is not really attributed to specifically for women. So I just wanted to give you one slide, one little taste of where what I would say if I was specifically gearing this to women. And this is where we might, as women, exert a little more influence. So when we look at the research around what women can do more differently in terms of increasing their influence, this is kind of the list that comes out. So the first is making sure we know what we want. So sometimes what happens is, and I'll just speak for myself, life gets really busy. I imagine, like, when I was young, I dreamt up all these ideas of things I wanted to become when I was a grown up. And then I spent like the next 20 years making them happen. And then I kind of forgot along the way to dream of what's after that. What do I want to do after that? And so sometimes what happens is we reach a certain stage in our career and we forgot to dream about what's next. And so we might be able to exert our influence more if we really know what we want and we really spend the time to reflect on what is the ideal next step for us. And then secondly, if we exert our influence when we ask for what I want. So I can't tell you the number of times I've coached with clients, women executives, and I've helped them think about what they want and then actually ask for what they want, and how positive the reception has been from their leadership to be like, thank you so much for just being very clear about what you want. So sometimes we're scared of sort of asking for what we want, but it usually lands incredibly well with upper leadership. And finally then, and continuing along that round, asking for more help. I know myself as a service provider, when I specifically both my roles at Accenture as well as at Bell were client-facing roles, and I was a supplier to those client-facing. I wanted to be a trusted advisor in those client-facing roles, and so I was very much in service to my clients, as an example, and I would rarely ask my clients for help. And I had to learn that when we ask for help, we actually it's actually a beautiful influencing, because they start to get vested in you and it deepens the quality relationship. So women, I think we are givers a lot, and it's really nice to make sure that we also ask and realize that part of the reason why we're givers is because we love the feeling of giving. And by not asking for help, we're not allowing other people to enjoy that feeling of giving. And so I had to kind of flip it on its head in my mind and say, it's actually rude for me to not ask for help because I don't enable them to give, and giving is such a wonderful feeling that I enjoy. A couple other things: being willing to be disliked. Sometimes when we need to influence something and influence a change, there's going to always be a certain sector of the population that is not going to like it, and that's not going to like us as a result of that. And so can we just step into the truth of that? Also being willing to be turned down. Sometimes we feel vulnerable and we don't want to put ourselves out there because we all have fear of failure. And then the final thing is whether we leverage our relationships enough. Women in general are phenomenal relationship builders and build very deep relationships. But again, getting back to this, are you asking for help? Are you advocating? Are you like being assertive about what you need? Are you really leveraging those relationships, or are you just kind of building them and then not ever really leveraging them in a way that can grow your career? So these are sort of some ideas around where we might be able to lean in a little bit more. And hopefully that's a good frame to sort of look at these tool sets now and think about which ones you want to apply. Any questions up to date for now, Chloe? Is our Q&A quiet, or is there a question that comes up, or does anyone want to comment in the chat around what they hear, or challenge me on anything that I just shared?
We have no Q&A at the moment. I don't see any question in the chat neither.
Okay, I'll keep going, but by all means, whenever you want to engage, please do. So let's just talk about leadership mindset a little bit. And I'm just gonna plug my 3 books, because I think I wrote these books to get my head around this thing called leadership. So as Chloe identified early, I started out as an engineer, chemical engineer, worked in manufacturing for many years, went back to school, did my MBA, joined Accenture, made my way up to the partner level. At the end, I was managing the client portfolio associated with aerospace in Canada, got recruited away by Bell for their Bell business markets. And then 9 years ago now, I decided to start my own company focused on leadership development. And I just became fascinated. I think if I could divide my career in pieces, the beginning was I was fascinated by kind of technical mastery. And then at Accenture in the upper years, I was really focused on this thing called, I think I would call it business mastery, just figuring out, P&L responsibilities and all those kinds of things and integrating with the market. And now I'm fascinated by all things leadership. So that's the journey. And over the last 9 years, about every 3 years, I'm learning so much with my clients because I have the incredible ability to work with many great leaders simultaneously. And I'm always trying to figure out, like, what are the things that they're leaning into or doing differently that maximizes their ease as well as their propulsion to success. And when I have enough information that I think I need to write it down and not forget it, I write a book. So these are my 3 books, and I'm going to refer to the 3 books in the presentation. And yes, I will put the link in the chat. I'm just afraid, actually, maybe Chloe, you can help grab that link and put it in the chat if it's possible. If not, I will definitely make sure that there we go. We're good. Excellent. Thank you, whoever did that. That's fantastic. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through a tiny bit of them just to give you a little bit of a preview, because I really felt like I couldn't do leadership mindsets justice in this, but it is a really important starting point when we think about influence. So my first book was Work Smart, and in Work Smart, basically there's 9 fundamental areas that I think leaders need to get right. And it was the 9 areas that I was seeing most often working with leaders. And all of these, to a certain extent, have a mindset component. This is your foundation. Like, if your foundation is not solid on these 9 core areas, then it's going to be hard to influence, because when we're influencing somebody else, they are sort of subconsciously getting a sense of how confident and stable we are as people. And so these are the 9 areas. The first is all around wellness. Like, are we well? Like, are we taking care of ourselves? But then also, are we positive? Are we opportunity oriented? Do they feel that we care about our relationship with them? Are we kind in general, just in the way that we treat people, and aware of what their aspirations are and their needs are? And then, do we know what success is like for us, right? That's part of, like, do you know what you want? What is your definition of success? And managerial is about, do you have systems and processes that makes you reliable to work with? And then action orientation is like, do you have the energy for the proponents to stay in action? This is like, if we get into a slump, we don't like sit on the floor for too long. We get ourselves back into action, because actions in motion stay in motion, right? And then the resiliency associated with, how do you bounce back when things get really tough? And tenacity, the last chapter, is all about having a beautiful vision of what you want to achieve and impact, and being tenacious. Even when there's no evidence that suggests that you can get there, how do you continuously move towards that North Star that is your North Star? So this, as you can see, there's a mindset component to each of these foundational items that is really important to make sure that when you're in front of somebody, you feel very solid. And then my second book, Iterate, I wrote during kind of the pandemic, in fact, when I was noticing that there was just so much difficulty living with this uncertainty. Like, what do we focus on? Everything's changing. And I kind of contrast, I invented this word called interactive. And what interactive is it's in contrast to proactive and reactive. So what I was noticing with my clients is they kind of had two choices at the beginning of the pandemic. And still today, because change just continues to happen so rapidly. So what are our two choices? We're either reactive, because things are changing so fast, we have to respond to what's going on, or we try to be proactive. But the reality is, it's really hard to be proactive when change is happening so fast. And so what was happening was people were becoming increasingly more reactive, and we were like not able to kind of feel very much in control, and not really able to influence the direction that we wanted to have. So I invented this word called interactive, that's about being iterative. And also, a lot of information in this book is about like just really focusing on leading indicators, not lagging metrics, because we can get, when we're reactive, we can get very obsessed with, what's the revenue today, and where are we wasting money, and we can get very granular and detail oriented. When at the end of the day, those are lagging metrics. Like, it's what you do now in terms of value creation. So I define value creation as knowledge capital times relationship capital divided by our well-being challenges, right? Because those work against us. So how are we every day leaning into these things? And again, influence has a huge component of what is the knowledge capital that you have or have access to, multiplied by your relationship capital. So that's a little bit what's in Iterate around mindset. And then a year and a half ago, despite the fact that I told my husband I would never write another book after Iterate, I was like, oh, I think I want to write another book. And this book is called Blind Spots, and it was released in the fall. And what Blind Spots was about was noticing the things that got my clients stuck the most often, and how they unstuck themselves. And there's a big influence component in blind spots, because what I define blind spots as is the gap between our intention and our impact. So we go to work every day trying to do this amazing job and propel performance. And yet we communicate, we take action, we do things, and there's an impact. And there's often a gap between your intention and your impact. And that's where your blind spots live. And the challenge with that is, your intention is blind to the people that you impact, and your impact is blind to you. And so blind spots is all about, how do you narrow the gap between your intention and impact? And all that becomes possible when you are able to really deal with a lot of feedback and a lot of data points, so that you can optimize your impact on other people. So those are some little previews of the books, because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that as we think about influence, we're really thinking about our mindset. And in blind spots, there are 7 blind spots identified, and one of the blind spots is called mismatched mindsets. And mismatched mindsets is when you are operating at a level. So I organize leadership in 3 buckets: leading self, leading others, and leading change. Okay. And what I've noticed in my work is that there's this sort of, we all have to do all 3, but there's the kind of this journey to mastery that starts with leading self. because we have to be able to organize ourselves, learn things, build capabilities. And so there's a whole set of activities around, leading yourself. And then we become responsible for other people. And then there's a whole other series of activities associated with leading others. It becomes less about us and more about them and activating them. And then after we sort of master that, we're often put in charge of these change programs, either because we're the lead of an organization and we need to lead the direction, we have to, lead the change in the market, or because we're leading a division that we need to respond to change in the market. And leading change has a whole other series of necessary mindsets, because oftentimes we're disrupting things and we're taking risks and we're doing all kinds of things that might be painful to leading others and also might be quite disruptive to leading ourselves. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do after this, because I just wanted to try to give you a tangible tool from this area, is to do a really short values assessment that's available at that link that that's in this slide. And maybe somebody can also pop it into the chat. This link will take you to like a little values analysis, because what I've done is I've kind of mapped values to these different mindsets. And so it's kind of fun to go in and just pick your favorite values. It'll get you to pick your favorite values, and it'll give you a little bit of a feel for how much of your leadership, of your top values, fall into which of these buckets. And does that match the role or level that you're in? There's generally, if I have to generalize in terms of careers, leading self, we're usually doing into our early 30s, and leading others, we're definitely doing generally by our early 40s. And then leading change, it's often beginning increasingly more important in these leadership positions. And then, if you're not kind of leading change in your 50s, then you're probably not having the impact that you want in your organization. So that's something that you can try to experiment with to see if your mindset is actually in the right level for what you're doing and for the influence that you're trying to exert in the world. So before I move, let me know if there's anything that comes to mind that you want to chat about, or I'll just keep going. We can also hold questions to the end. I take it by the silence. We're going to keep moving. Thank you for the link, and I hope that you enjoy that little assessment. So the next thing that I talk to my leaders a lot about, and when I say my leaders, I mean my clients, the executives that I work with, is focusing on who versus how. I noticed this thing very precisely when I began. So understandably, just in all transparency, when I started my practice 9 years ago, I had to build a portfolio of clients. And at the beginning, my network was kind of confused that I didn't want to kind of continue with the jobs that I had had. And so I was attracting different executive levels of clients, and I was also attracting different sizes of businesses. So I was serving in early days some smaller clients that I didn't have a lot of experience with. And then over time, my corporate network and very, very senior leaders at large organizations began become interested in my work. I'd say that there's this incredible turning point around 2 to 3 years in, where all of a sudden my network kind of woke up and let me back in, except in a new role. And what I noticed as I kind of was working with different levels of organizations and different sizes of organizations and different sort of scalability in terms of leadership, the more senior and the more scale, the more our coaching conversations were never about execution or strategy. They all were about what I would say, who am I going to put where? Almost like there's this little chessboard of like, who am I going to, this division has a problem. Who am I going to put to lead it, for them to figure out the strategy and for them to figure out how to address it? And so part of influence is like, what do you want to be influencing? And there's this orientation around making sure that you're delegating the right questions to the right level of the organization, and you're empowering the right people to be able to answer those questions. So this is just a little visual that I created. So when I'm working with very, very top executives, they're usually thinking about two things: why do something, or why not do something, and who will lead it. And that's pretty much all they're focused on. Their influence is around the who. And at the strategic level, at the sort of next leadership level, then they're thinking about what they're going to do and when in timelines. And then at the execution level, we're in the details around where it will happen and how it will happen and all the milestones associated with it. Now, the reason why I think this is important is because if you're trying to influence someone very, very senior and you're bringing them like a lot of details, like it's not interesting to them because that's not what they want to be thinking about or asking about, right? And so when you're trying to influence at different levels, you want to be thinking about what questions are you actually, is top of mind for those individuals? And how do you speak to what is the appropriate level? And then for you, as you raise up in the organization, how do you let go of some of these things that when you were the expert, you wanted to know every little thing about? And over time, as you kind of move your way up, you shouldn't either burden yourself and or limit your team members that you've empowered as who's that are to do this with making those judgment calls. So this is the who versus how. As we are influencing, we want to remember that it depends on who we're talking to. And in general, the more senior we get, it's more about the who than the how. And what's very, very important also to remember is that when we don't do this, what happens is we lose ownership from the people that we're empowering. So if we put a who in a role and we tell them where, when, why, and how, and all these things, we are going to, their performance in that role will decline because self-determination is what drives ownership, i.e. we want to decide what we're going to do. And then when we do it, we are much more committed to it being successful. So what raises accountability and raises productivity and what raises quality is that people get to have the power to decide. And there's this thing about like, when we're a leader, perhaps we're setting an agenda for change, and that's our dream. And we can try to force it by putting in expectations, but ultimately the only way we're going to get ownership and adoption is if we find ways to understand how our dream meets other people's dreams and how it's synergistic with other people's dreams. And then even better, how we let people who have dreams move towards those for the betterment of the company and the organization. So that's something to keep in mind. And of course, there's a very famous quote from Steve Jobs about it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. So how do we shift when that shift from expertise to influence? How does it change the way in which we interact with others and empower others on our team? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about influence versus persuasion, because when I was studying this, I wanted to sort of figure out, like, is it persuasion or how are these things different? And I did a lot of reflection on this. And what I realized is that the best people who are the best influencers, they're not trying to persuade. Persuasion to me is a little bit like an arm wrestle. Like you're going to like see who has the strongest arguments and you're bringing those arguments to each other, right? So that's persuasion. And influence is all about the win-win. So it's almost like you're playing the wrong game. Somebody comes to convince you of something and it's like they put their hand down on the table and they start trying to arm wrestle you. And we're like, and we want to like, we can't help ourselves. We want to arm wrestle them back. But we have to remember that we're playing the wrong game. Influence is about sort of finding that win-win, okay? So even if it's tempting, we have to stop. And what influence is it's not about us convincing somebody. It's about the other person changing their mind for their own reasons. They're changing their own mind. I like to think about influence as an inside job. It means it's inside their head. Now you might be bringing ideas and you might be facilitating a dialogue that helps them think through their own reasoning, but you're not actually trying to convince them. You're trying to enable a conversation that gets them to make the right decision for them. And I think about influence as an inside job, and I think about persuasion as push energy. And the problem with push energy is as soon as you stop pushing, it falls back, right? So we don't want to use persuasion because it's push energy. Now, what do I mean specifically by persuasion? I mean, if we're trying to convince people with facts, data, and reasoning, or we're trying to negotiate or enforce an agreement or boundary. Like we see this, sometimes we're trying to convince them and then we can't convince them. They're not convinced, our push energy is not working. So then we try to just enforce a boundary or enforce an agreement. And then that probably doesn't really work either because they're not in alignment. And then sometimes we threaten or overpower or escalate to others to force people, right? And so a lot of us spend a bit of a career down here. And in fact, I can think about many periods of my life where this is where my emphasis was. And I thought that was influence. And what I've discovered over the years is it's not influence. Influence is very different. Influence is ideally very focused on curiosity at the beginning. So what do we do when we want to influence somebody? The first thing we do is we want to understand their aspirations and their desires. We want to understand what they already know and want. And we want to find a way for whatever we want to influence them to bolster or help or support or create a win-win for something they already want. That's the easiest and fastest and most thorough way of influencing somebody, is actually finding a link to something they already want. Less, but still great, is we shape a compelling vision of the future. This is when we come in and we say, this is what could be possible, and doesn't this sound compelling? And in that case, we're hoping that like this idea of your vision lights up in their brain and makes them happy, but it's not as good as actually knowing. It's a little bit of a guess, but it's still better because you're painting a picture and maybe they can add to that picture, and you're both creating a shared picture that influences them to take direction in a way that's synergistic with what you want. And the least powerful way is to get kind of pragmatic around like really structuring like a RACI with mutually beneficial collaboration. It's good. It's just that it gets really close to trying to convince them. It's more bottom up than it is top down. So these are the ideas around influence versus persuasion. And I think I see there's something in the Q&A. Is that right? Let me take a look. Oh, yes, there will be a recording available. That is an easy answer. So we will absolutely have a recording available. And I hope that you guys get a chance to rewatch too, if there's something that was interesting. Okay. So how do we know, how do we find out, how do we investigate people's desires and aspirations? And this is like a little sneaky investigation process, because I think that you should try as much as possible with anybody that you want to influence, whether the person reports to you or is a peer or is a boss or a super boss, is find out these three things. Find out what they want to learn. Everybody that's, that's ambitious and that wants to have a positive impact to the world, they want to learn something this year. So find little ways to listen and hear and try to and ask what kind of thing they want to learn this year. And then also people have things they want to contribute. So things that they just like doing, or they think they're good at, or that they're particularly passionate about, and they want to contribute. So find out a little bit about what people want to contribute. Like if they had a great year, what would make them really proud? And then the third thing you want to find out is what beautiful experiences do they want to create or do they like? Like maybe somebody really likes doing offsites in Costa Rica, and having a beautiful team event somewhere tropical or somewhere like, and these things are important to know, because as you're understanding, your brain is going to create sort of mixes of things that you can bring to them that will link to things that you've heard them say. So I think it's always good. Now, here's the bad news. The bad news is when you start doing this, it can feel a little bit intimidating and a little scary, because it's almost like you're asking like a child for their Christmas list, and you're asking them for like, with no limits, no budget, no, the sky's the limit. And so sometimes you'll hear all of these things and you're like, oh my goodness, the people I work for me, they want to do this and this and this and this. And we can sort of feel a little bit burdened, and we can sort of feel like there's no way I'm going to be able to deliver this for this person, and I don't even want to know, because I can't, like, we don't have the means to deliver. And what I want you to do is like park all of that, like just listen. There's no promises being made. And what you'll find is that even by knowing these tiny little things, as you're moving through the year, you're going to find tiny, tiny, tiny ways to honor those desires and those aspirations in very minuscule or big ways. And all of that is going to help you with your influencing strategy as you shape what you're trying to move forward. So get really curious about what people want to learn, contribute, and experience, and do this not just with people that you have, positional or hierarchical authority over. Do this with everyone. Do this with customers. Do this with suppliers. Every time you know a desire and aspiration, you have a much greater chance of being able to influence it. Okay, and then I'm just going to talk about co-creative relationships really quickly. So co-creative relationships is another thing that I really work a lot with my clients to invest in, to spend some time proactively investing in their relationships. And I actually get them to score their relationships. So this is the quadrant that I make them draw their relationships on, okay? And there's basically the two things we're thinking about is how much alignment do we have with this person? And do I know and honor their aspirations? Do I know their aspirations? And so if you look, when we have low alignment and we don't know their aspirations, we're in a transactional relationship. It's like we're just exchanging. It's like I always use the example of, if I'm checking out at a grocery store, I don't really care what the checkout clerk's aspirations are. I'm not thinking that way. I'm just making sure that they charge me the right amount of money, and they don't care about my aspirations. They're just making sure that I pay my bill and don't steal anything, right? So we have very, very tight expectations of each other, and we're just going to enforce our boundaries and limits. But you can think about, there are some probably collaborators in your organization that you're like that with, that you're just kind of policing each other. Now, when we have alignment and we still don't really know what they want, we're usually in these collaborative relationships. And I would say 80% of my clients' relationships are in collaborative relationships. They're healthy. They're kind of in the category of, that expression, you don't have to like someone, but you have to work for them. Like, that's kind of this bucket. It's like we have agreed standards and processes, and we work together, fairly friendly, but we're not really super excited about bolstering each other's career. And so that's where we start to get into co-creative. So you can see that shift where we have high alignment, but now we're in co-creative relationships where I share my aspirations, they share their aspirations, and we're constantly trying to help each other meet our aspirations. And I'm sure many of you have relationships like this, sponsors that are like this, or people that and the challenge is that we don't have enough of these relationships. And the same thing that makes those relationships great is the thing that will make your overall influence so much greater across the organization. So the target quadrant, and I just want you to challenge yourself for this, the target quadrant for all your professional relationships is the co-creative. There's no reason to settle for less. It's not that hard to have a conversation with someone, and instead of just talking about the weekend and what the weather was like, you also talk about what their aspirations are for their career, for now, for short term, for long term. What do they want to learn, grow, and contribute, and what experiences they want to have. It's small talk that's really meaningful, but that then enters your list of algorithms and data points that you're going to have with them when you're trying to influence them or put together an agenda. Now, I'll just talk about controlling for 1 second, and that's when we know people's aspirations, but we don't align with them. And this is a fighting bucket. So I used to run into this bucket. In one particular situation that I'm not proud of, I was very much in this bucket. And this was just for context. I had a large outsourcing operation that was supporting my client that was in India. And for many months, I had been struggling to find a service delivery lead for that entity that would really work well with my client, because my client had some very specific requirements. And it took me a long time to find this person. And before I found the person, there were lots of other people that were not really great fits. And so I found this person. We were working together. It was phenomenal. And then 6 months later, he wanted another job. And he's like, I've done my thing. I want to do something different. And I was like, So he shared his aspirations, and I did not want him to change jobs. I was like, no, you have to do this for longer, which was like totally because my job would be harder if he wasn't in his job. And I struggled with it, and I tried to convince him, and I tried to come up with all kinds of justifications for why I wouldn't support his move. And finally, I decided that I had to be in co-creative with him because he's just a phenomenal leader. And I found a way to kind of get him to where he wants. And then he helped me find a really great successor for his role. And so when we are in these, when we feel that visceral idea towards our desires and aspirations or somebody else's, we have to make sure that we kind of get in line with these co-creative relationships. So I got a question around, what are my desires? Yeah, so my desires are my desires presently with building Leaderly is to learn everything I possibly can about leadership. And in particular, I am obsessed with neuroscience. So what I want to learn, just to answer these questions, I want to learn everything I can about neuroscience. And the reason why is because I'm an engineer, and I like to not think of leadership as this sort of, I don't like it being this kind of soft, psychology-based practice. I like it to be really concrete, and I like to know what areas of my brain are being activated at these different parts. And there's so much emerging information coming out of neuroscience. And I feel like we're getting an operating manual for our brain. So that's something that I want to learn. How do I want to contribute? I want to contribute in every way I can to support women advancing into top leadership roles. I coach men and women equally. I vote 50-50, but I am particularly passionate about supporting women around becoming their next level of greatness. And then if I contribute, and then if I tell you what beautiful experiences I want to have. So my husband is nearing retirement, and I want him to join Leaderly and work together with me. I want him to lead my business development efforts. And in particular, what I want to do at the beginning of the year is map out all the places that I want to travel to and have him go sell a speech for me in those locations. So those are the beautiful experiences I want to create. So I'm just going, like, those are the things that those 3 questions are the things that you can use for self-reflection and to reflect. But thank you for asking, Irina. I appreciate that. So back to co-creation, this is what we're doing. We're trying to understand, we're trying to move from, I think there must be a build on this slide. Yes, we're trying to move from having to focus on your own mandate and this policing energy of my expectations, your expectations, to our process, right? And I think a lot of you probably have collaborative relationships. You probably drive alignment fairly well, but then to move up to that co-creative cloud, and you go from uninterested in sometimes we're just uninterested in their aspirations, or they're just unknown. It's not that we're uninterested, we just don't know them, to known, which is we know them, but maybe like with my example, we're not necessarily actively helping to work on them, to we're sponsoring people to move towards their aspiration. And that's how you get to the co-creative climate. And if you model that, they will model that. And you are also a little bit more savvy about what you want, and also communicative about what you want. And yeah, and then ultimately you're driving your success. So I'm going to give you another example just to try and notice when you're in conversations, because I want you to notice your conversations, because transforming your conversations will transform your influence. So there's a framework that I studied with one of my neuroscience teachers around these different levels of conversation. So the first one being when we exchange information. So again, that can be kind of called transactional, where we're just sort of telling and asking different questions, and we're just basically trying to exchange information, and we're actually probably trying to have our information influence the other person. And there's an unhealthy attitude on each of these. There's kind of an unhealthy thing. Tell, sell, yell is where transaction becomes dysfunctional. So I'll just give you a personal example. I will want my son to come to the cottage with us on the weekend, and I will tell him, like, I would like you to come to the cottage on the weekend. And he will tell me, he doesn't want to come. He wants to stay home. He wants to do his own thing. He has his own plans. So then I'll try to sell it to him. Well, there's going to be these people there and your cousins are going to be there and it's going to be fun and we're going to have food and it's going to be swimming and blah, 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 blah. So I'll try to sell it to him and he'll just like basically, say, well, I have this, which I'm not really listening to, which probably are really cool things, but I'm not listening to them. And then you go into yell like, well, I'm your mother and you're coming. So that's the dysfunction of transaction. We're not really listening to each other. Positional is when we debate it. So that would look like, okay, let's debate this. Like, what are the pros and cons and all this kind of stuff? And we're comparing. And it's okay, except that we're often still addicted to our version. And then co-creation conversations are, we're allowing to explore. We're allowing everyone to throw lots of ideas. And where it becomes dysfunctional is if we never actually get to anything, right? Because you can imagine that these other conversations are narrowing in nature, whereas co-creative can be kind of wide open. And I just want to show you what this looks like practically. So I just picked like a project review meeting. So most project review meetings start in transactional. So say the project manager shares knowledge and views, right? Then other people notice things and they start interrupting and trying to put their perspectives in. And then the project manager tries to defend or provide information to kind of soothe the disgruntled data points. And we end up in this place where there's kind of limited cohesion and we don't know how to move forward. And then generally we move into positional where somebody sort of takes a position and tries to shut down the other process and uses power to pick the forward decision. And then usually we leave feeling a bit tired because it's been kind of this fairly unproductive. We're not really influencing each other. We're in collaboration, but our processes are not, we're not really in high alignment and we're not willing to kind of co-create or shift based on other people's data points. And so we don't feel good about those conversations. And a co-creative conversation would be very different. So a co-creative of the same meeting is the leader comes in and first asks everybody, what do people need to share? How do people feel so far? What outcome do they need? So you're allowing them from the very beginning, you're letting all that information come out onto the table really naturally and undefensively, just like bringing all of these data points to the table. And then you can go into transactional to kind of discuss or point out things or organize the information. But then what you want to do is you actually want to create options and from the move forward. And then what you're going to do is you're going to debate. You're going to move into debate to make a decision, but you're going to debate options, not each other, because everybody has kind of contributed to these options. And now it's easier to maintain neutrality because there's not a single option that's tied to one person or a single opinion that's tied to one person. And that's how you'll influence a group more effectively, because basically everybody is helping with that alignment in the direction. And what this requires is like some courage and a lot of openness for the meeting to go in a way that maybe you didn't plan for it to go, which can take, which is why the mindsets are really important. I remember thinking that a meeting that was great would be a meeting where I went in and they followed my agenda and we got everything done and it was efficient. And I had to learn that a meeting that was great was that everybody sort of changed it and we adjusted and we turned and we went in directions that I didn't know, could not have predicted. And that's the beauty of co-creation. So what I'm encouraging you guys to do is for you to take this little chart and write the names of people. And I typically tell my clients to focus on 12 relationships. They should always be working on 6 to 12, okay? 6 to 12 relationships that could dramatically change, the success you're able to drive this year. Figure out where they are and then spend just a little bit of intention when you're with these people or when you orchestrate opportunities to be with people to move into co-creation by understanding more about their aspirations and understanding more about their metrics so that they can align. So this is a little cheat sheet, that helps you figure out where you are. So for instance, if you're low on alignment, it's because do you really understand their role and their challenges? Do you really understand how they're going to be evaluated and what key outcomes they need? Do you understand their stakeholders? So those are all alignment questions that are really important. That'll take you up the left-hand axis or up. And then aspirations is where we get really curious about what success looks like for them and what do they want going forward. So that is the material that I've planned. Okay, we talked about why influence matters. We talked about our leadership mindsets, focusing on who versus how, influence versus persuasion, and how to build co-creative relationships. Well, let's pause there for any other questions before a little mini close. Or a takeaway? Ooh, nice takeaways. Karen shared some great takeaways. Oh, I think this is the summary. Yes, I think it's a summary. So are there any other things people would like to share before I close? Okay, all right. Chloe, do you have anything to share before we close?
No, I think it was great. Maybe we can wait one more minute. If you have any question, please use the Q&A or...
Yeah, absolutely. What I want you guys to realize, what I study a lot is the importance of our prefrontal cortex and specifically our reticular activating system, which is the thing that navigates what we notice in the world. And so we want to picture a day. I want you all to picture a day when you easily motivate others, when you exponentially grow your impact, and when you continuously harness the collective intelligence of all of your collaborators, okay? And by listening to the work you did today, by leaning into some of these tools, you will absolutely be closer to that day, okay? Because your brain is already envisioning it and seeing it. And the last slide, there's just a lot of information around how to contact me or some other information if you want to dialogue even more. And thank you so much for the thank yous in the chat. It's really great.
Thank you everyone for being here. We're gonna send the recording of the presentation and all the link on our LinkedIn page. So please follow Women in Tech Canada LinkedIn, and we're gonna make sure that the recording is available. And thank you again, Marisa, for the great presentation.
It was a pleasure to be with all of you. So go out there and influence the world.
Bye, have a good day.